Button. All right. So as you as you're aware, we're continuing in our journey here that gets a little bit longer each week. We started our session, you know, uh, with why four gospels and then genealogies and beginnings. Looked at the birth narratives, looked at the baptism and temptation. Um, we took a kind of a break there, talked a little bit about church history, because we're kind of looking at not only the Gospels, how they're similar, how they're different, but also um, the birth of some of the theologies, like for example, you know uh, the uh, what am I going to say? I forget when we talked about.
Church history.
No, but why do we talk about church history? What we were talking about I forget something. We are talking about something. Go look at that session. You can figure it out. All right. And last week we were talking about the Sermon on the Mount versus the Sermon on the Plain. And this week we're going to look at the Transfiguration. So the Transfiguration is only in the Synoptic Gospels. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It does not appear in the Gospel of John. And our goal tonight is to kind of look at those three accounts, um, and kind of where are they same, where are they different, and how do they individually and together contribute to our understanding of who Jesus is and his ministry in the world. So basically, if we're looking at the Transfiguration, um, it's in Matthew 17, verses 1 through 9, Mark 9, 2 to 10, and Luke 9, 28 to 36. Um, and so we are going to look at each one of those uh, stories individually and then we'll compare them. All right. And so we're going to look at them. So just kind of maybe take a little piece of paper and kind of jot down, how are they like and how are they different as we hear each one. And so let's start with the Gospel of Matthew. You'll find it in chapter 3, verses 3 to 17. This is in the English Standard Version. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make three tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one of the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And his disciples asked him, Then why do the scribes say that Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. And the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. Okay, as we look at Matthew and Transfiguration, we also need to look at it in its context. So, I harp all the time, if we're going to understand, we're going to talk about context, we need to do what?
Go back.
Before. Before and what happens after. And so if we look at what comes before and after this account, we have Peter's confession of Christ. Jesus predicts his death and their call to discipleship. Then we heard the story we have. And then afterwards, the discussion of Elijah, and the healing of a demon-possessed boy. Okay. So if we go over then to Mark, we find this in Mark 9, 2-13. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved son, listen to him. And they suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come? And he said to them, Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how it is written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it was written of him. All right, and so if we look at Mark in context, we have Peter's confession of Christ. Jesus predicts his death, the call to discipleship, same as we had in Matthew. And afterwards, we have discussion of Elijah and healing of the demon-possessed boy. So far, if we kind of look at the context between Matthew and Mark, what would you say about the context?
Same.
Okay, it's the same. All right, and then our last story of the Transfiguration comes from Luke 28-36. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James, and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his wife was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were very heavy with sleep. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it's good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. And as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. And if we look at the context here, Peter's confession of Christ, Jesus predicts his death and call to discipleship. And then after, we have a healing of a demon-possessed boy, Jesus predicting his death again, and some argument among the disciples. Okay, and that the discussion was about who is the greatest. All right, so there are the 3. I know this is probably a little small on your screens, but these are the 3 transfiguration stories kind of side by side. So as you listen to them, what were some common features? Just spout off what the common features were.
Peter, John, and James were there.
Okay, so we had 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John.
Mm-hmm. Almost everything, all the quotations are almost the same.
When you say quotations, what
no, like what
God said.
Okay, what God said. Okay.
What they asked him about the tents.
Yeah.
Okay.
things like that.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic.
And they all refer to the the gown or the dress
the
as
dress.
being like really intensely white.
Okay. All right. So there was
Would have
an
been a little
with
bit
this.
difficult under those circumstances with
And
not being
no,
able to like scrub your clothes.
no
No
washing
laundry
machine.
detergent. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's superfluous. But anyway.
All right. What else?
Moses and
three-
Elijah are in all three.
Okay, we
Mhm.
have Moses, Elijah.
The
wanting
cloud
to
is
make
in all three.
tents. Mhm.
Mhm.
The cloud is in all three. Okay.
Yeah,
The
and
tent.
like Herman was saying, the 3 tents, the disciples had no problem saying that, all right, these guys are here, we need to make shelter for them.
Well,
Okay.
that was Peter, right?
All of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of them.
Well, Peter is the spokesman, but it says it says they wanted three tents or dwellings or whatever you want to call it, depending on your translation to listen to, one for each one of them.
Two of them mention Elijah, although one goes a step further and says that it was John the Baptist.
Oh, you're talking about at the end.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, because they both mention Moses and Elijah being with Jesus, but at the end, when they were talking about the purpose of Elijah, so, yep, we have that where in Matthew, and we have that in Mark, but not
Yeah, that's a
Luke.
big difference. Luke leaves that all out.
Okay, all right. So we
Do they
have.
feel that Elijah was reincarnated?
What do you think?
I don't know.
All right, so that's a good question. Do they think Elijah was reincarnated? And so, well, let's think about that for a minute, and let's kind of back up the story here a little bit. So hang on to that one. We're going to circle back in just a sec. And so we can build sort of a common story, right? If we take the three stories, we can all say they went up where? They went up to a mountain.
Mountain.
Okay. So Jesus went on a high mountain, Peter, James, and John. Okay. And then there was a period where there was a bright light, and clothes became dazzling white. Now that varies in each thing, but there's this transfiguration thing that happens. Okay. And so while that's happening, there's the appearance of Elijah and Moses. Okay. And they were talking with Jesus. Okay. Then we have Peter, James and John looking at it. Peter speaks up and says, it's good that we're here. Let's build three tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Then we have the voice that comes, says that it's his beloved son, and listen to him. Okay. And so that's the basic story, the transfiguration that is common to all three, correct?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, there's also then Jesus is alone when they
Okay.
look
Or-
later.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so Moses and Elijah disappear, and then it's just kind of, that's not bright anymore. It's just Jesus standing there with the three of them. Okay. And then, they go down the mountain. So if we think about that common story, so there's a common thread, and it's an important enough story that all three of them have it within their gospel accounts. And so as we think about the common story, what's the purpose of the story? Why is it here? Kind of, if we go back for a second and we kind of look at, all three of them share the same context beforehand. We have Peter's confession, Jesus predicting his death, and then a call to discipleship. So we have that, and then we have the story of the transfiguration, and then they come down to the mountain, come down off the mountain. So if we're thinking about that, what is the gospel writer's purpose of having the transfiguration story here?
Since it comes for all three of them right after the identification of Jesus as Messiah, it kind of cements his standing and, in place with Moses and Elijah, who are known to be, um, you know, venerated
Okay.
prophets.
All right.
Sorry, we
So,
got some cat drama here.
okay. So as we think about this, then as Deb said, we have a connection. There was a pronouncement that Jesus was the Messiah, and then this comes after. So in some ways, this is connected to that statement. Okay, it's connected to that statement. Now, so it's connected to that statement, but then we have to step back for a minute and ask the question, okay, what was their understanding of Messiah?
A ruler, well, not a ruler, but a savior, somebody who was going to bring them out of bondage.
Yeah.
Okay,
king.
so it was
A
someone
war
who was,
leader. A
so
war
it was
leader.
a what leader?
A war leader.
War leader. Okay. Yeah. So it was going to be someone that was going to bring them out of bondage. And so when we use language like that, that we're going to bring them out of bondage, where does our mind go if we think about the Old Testament?
Moses.
Exodus.
Moses in the Exodus.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So it goes back to this idea of Exodus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it goes to this idea of Exodus. And so what is what is the understanding of Exodus? If you're a good Jewish person, what's your understanding of Exodus?
It's leading you to the promised land.
Okay.
Liberation.
Okay,
Yeah, deliverance.
liberation. Okay. So we use the model if I'm going to say the word Exodus, okay, our minds go to what we know as the Exodus. All right, so we have the Israelites who their forefathers, Abraham and his sons had made their way down to Egypt. Okay, remember Joseph was sold into slavery, and later on there was a famine that came to the land that brought all of the family down, and they settled in the land of Goshen, and they multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, and there was a very large group of people. So they kind of transitioned from just a small 12 person family plus their stuff into a large community. And over the course of time, we know that Pharaoh, who was kindly to Joseph and his family, had died off, and there was another Pharaoh that rose and did not know them, thought that they had become a large group of people, and he was afraid that one day they might try to overthrow them. So he enslaves them. Okay. And so that's the backstory. And then we have, Moses, his whole thing comes back, has the 12 plagues and leads them out of Egypt. We have Passover, leads them through the water, leads them into the desert. Now, is that the end of the story of Exodus?
No.
Okay, so when's the story end?
40 years later.
Okay,
80 years later.
yeah,
80.
it ends when they go into the promised land, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, when we think about Exodus, it's not just merely, liberation from, enslavement or bondage, but it's that journey through and formation into a community of people that are going to take over the promised land. Okay, that enter the promised land. Now that becomes sort of the model that we use when we talk about Exodus in the Old Testament. But is that the only Exodus we see?
No.
Okay, what else do we see?
Well, this is going out on a limb again, as I usually do. In Revelation.
Okay, I'm talking Old Testament.
Well,
But-
no, I think it ties in together
That-
because Jesus appears in snow white garments with Elijah and Moses.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you, Sue, but hold on to that one. You're getting ahead of us. Getting ahead of us. You're excited. I know about the New Testament.
Oh, please, I'm a Baptist, you know that.
Look,
We're
but-
into this.
yeah,
But
look
anyway.
look at the Old Testament first, because we need to talk about Moses and Elijah. So we have the one person, okay, that is the the pinnacle, the leader, synonymous with the Exodus is we have Moses, right? Okay,
Mhm.
and he appears in this story. But what else is happening? Do we see any other Exoduses in the Old Testament?
Well, I guess you could say it's a stretch for the Noah and the ark.
Hmm.
Not really a stretch at all.
What about Abram?
Not really a stretch at all.
What about Abram?
Abram. Herman said Abram.
Ah, okay. Yeah, we got Abram. Okay.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at the creation story, Adam and Eve, we have all of these. So all of the Old Testament is based upon this idea of Exodus. Okay. And if we think about that, okay, in Old Testament tradition, kind of the person, as they look at the overall Exodus, because, we have the Exodus, but then we have, they enter the promised land, they get kicked out of the promised land, they're back in the promised land, but the promised land's not where it hasn't returned to its, fullness of the past. So they're always in this tension of being in the middle of Exodus without fully experiencing the end of Exodus. And so if we think about that, the second person that becomes important that Jesus meets with is Elijah. Okay, because what happened to Elijah? Okay, let's start with something even basic. Who was Elijah?
Prophet.
Major
Great.
prophet.
Good. He was a prophet. Okay. He was a prophet, and he had he was a mentor for another prophet by the name of
Elisha.
Elisha. Okay. And so we have Elijah and Elisha that were together, and Elijah gets towards the end of his life, and what happens?
He's taken up to heaven.
Right. He was taken up to heaven, he chariot into heaven. He never dies. Okay. And so part of that in Jewish tradition is that Elijah hadn't died, and that the ushering in of the new Exodus is when he comes back. Okay. And it becomes important if you think about Seder, at the end of Seder, during Seder, what do they do?
They
Empty
leave a
chair.
spot for him.
Yeah.
Each
Yeah, they have an empty spot for Elijah, and they end the Seder with the hope that and maybe next year Elijah's going to come and enter into this movement of Exodus, and we're finally going to move out. All right.
But he wasn't the only one. Enoch also.
Yeah, Enoch as well, but you know, it's in their tradition they've singled out Elijah for that. And so, you know, Moses represents the Exodus, well, you know, the leader of Exodus, and Elijah is there with Jesus and represents what is going to be, you know, when he's here, the Exodus comes. Okay. Now, we fast forward, we're in the middle of what's the New Testament, and so we're into Sue's territory now. And so, you know, what do we see when we think about well, let's before we get to Revelation, let's think about you know, Jesus. So what as Christians, what how do we see Exodus?
We're going home.
Okay, yeah. So we start with we're bound, um, bound in our sin. It messes with a relationship. We have Jesus who does what? Dies for our sins, kind of leads us through an area, and we're going to go home, which means that, you know, we end up in the promised land. Okay, so if we look at that Exodus in a Testament perspective, that's the way we look at it. And if we look at it, isn't that what uh, the book of Revelation is all about? That final, you know, Exodus. Okay, so we have this Exodus happening. So we're here with Jesus, and you know, he has these two people. So we have Elijah and we have Moses, you know, representing, you know, the whole of the Old Testament, you know, the law and the prophets, and you know, all that the law and the prophets represent, Jesus is going to be bring to fruition. Okay. So they're talking about that. And so so we have that going on, but why do we have the transfiguration? How is it connected to this idea of the Messiahship? We said that the Messiah, as they saw it, was going to be this person who was a great king, a great leader, a great warrior. Okay. But that person was still going to be what?
Human.
A person. Yes, a person. And so when we see Jesus and he's transfigured there with Moses and Elijah, what is the gospel writer saying in that little story there?
He's
What?
God.
Okay, great that he's God. Okay. And so we see that, you know, the connections made, okay, Jesus is the Messiah, but this Jesus is not a human being only, but he's also God. And so God is playing a part in this Exodus. Now, my question to you is this. So we have the transfiguration in all three of these counts. How come we don't see it in John?
Because he already knew it was John. I'm sorry, he already knew he was God.
Right, right. So, you know, you know, when we think about the synoptic gospels, you know, we run, you know, they start with the premise that Jesus is human, and we move into the divine. When we talk about John, John starts with the premise that Jesus is already divine, and we see the divine come to earth. So he has no need to include the transfiguration. Okay. And so as we look at it, then the setting's the same. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John to a high mountain. They're separated from the other disciples. It happens just after Jesus' prediction and of his death and resurrection. Again, an important feature because, you know, in their understanding of Messiah, was the Messiah going to be crucified on a cross and be put to death and then resurrected?
No.
No, because that would, you know, if you die on a Roman cross, that is not victory. That's what? Defeat. Okay. We have Jesus' transformation. You know, he dramatically changes his face and he's altered, and he becomes dazzling white. Now, if we go back here, what are some differences that we can see?
Well, in Matthew, Jesus tells them not to tell anybody what they saw.
Okay.
And I don't
Right.
think it said it in the other two.
The Mark one says that too.
The Mark
Yeah.
one does? Okay,
But
Mhm.
okay, so
Yeah.
it's in Matthew and Mark,
but not Luke.
but not Luke.
In
Yeah.
Luke, there's a variation on it where they said in those days they told no one, like it was their choice.
Right. So
Mm.
in Matthew and Luke, I mean Matthew and Mark, we have Jesus telling them to be quiet, and in Luke, it just kind of seems like it just happens. Okay.
I noticed that in the Matthew account, Jesus touched them,
Okay.
and that didn't happen in the others.
Yep.
In Matthew and Luke, I guess it is, mentions Jesus' face where Mark doesn't.
Mm.
He says it is shown like but they actually say his appearance of his face was altered in Luke, and then the other one says his face shone like the sun. But I
Mhm.
don't think the other one says anything. Just says he was transfigured before them. Doesn't, and his clothing, but it doesn't say anything about his facial appearance.
Yeah. What'd you say, Alan?
Not, we got a call, but we're telling them we're in a Bible study.
Mm. What else do we notice that's different?
That last line in Matthew, then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. It's not mentioned elsewhere.
Yeah,
Okay.
We called about the Sixers.
I thought that it was interesting too.
Anything else
Um,
that you notice that's different?
Yeah, in the Luke account, the when Moses and Elijah appear, they were speaking of his departure when he was about to, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. It mentions that context, and it says that Peter and Peter, James, and John were sleepy.
Mhm.
Yes. Mhm.
Yes.
Seems like they're sleepy a lot. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But they came fully awake though when they saw the glory.
I'll bet.
Let's look. When did this happen? How many days after?
Oh yeah. So
8
there were
days.
two
6
accounts
days.
that said 6 days, and then one that said 8. Luke says
Yeah.
8.
About
Mhm.
yeah.
And as you look, what was Jesus' intention taking them to the mountain?
To pray.
Was that in all of them?
No, that was in Luke.
In Luke.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Any other differences you can see?
So what's interesting though, in terms of that being in Luke, is it makes me think about what is to come in the garden, later at the Last Supper. It's kind of like that happens again.
The sleepiness.
Well, the going up the mountain, Jesus is
Mm.
heading up the mountain to pray. He says, "Stay with me while I do," and they're sleepy.
Mm. Yeah, so one of the things we have to think about when we think about the Gospel of Luke, is that a lot of times we'll see Jesus go up the mountain to pray. Okay. And typically when that happens, we have special things or different things happen, which becomes important. So whenever, Luke is saying Jesus went up the mountain to pray, it's probably time to, pay attention because something special is going to happen. And a lot of times when they have that happen, we see sleepy disciples. Now, when when Luke is using the word heavy with sleep, Is it just a matter of I'm tired, or is it something deeper than that?
They were bored waiting for him, waiting for Jesus to get done, Brian. Tired of
Okay.
waiting, tired of
Okay.
waiting for him.
So they were heavy, and then they became fully awake. In some ways, it's Luke's way of discussing and talking about understanding. You know, heavy with sleep.
Yeah.
They're clouded. They didn't understand. And then they were fully awake and had some understanding.
I don't know if this makes any difference, but I noticed they address him. Each one is addressed different. Matthew's, he's addressed as Lord. Mark, he's addressed as Rabbi. And John, he's addressed as Master. Matthew, Luke, John, right? Matthew, Luke.
Yeah. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Uh-huh.
Luke. He's addressed as Master. So they address every one of them. He said they basically say the same thing, but they address them all differently.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew was the Jew, Luke is the Gentile.
Mm-hmm.
And in two of them, they were told to listen to him, but in one, they just said that he was pleased.
Okay. Great. Great. So, I thought I had finished similarities.
He
So,
says listen to him all 3 times.
so we have visitors and we have divine confirmation similarities. Here's the unique gospel stuff we have. So, we have in Matthew and we have in Mark, they mention 6 days, but Matthew mentions 6 days later. So it's very specific. And Jesus' face shone like the sun. So why would that be important in Matthew's account?
Because it's like Moses when he was on the mountain.
Right. So in some ways, we understand, we've talked about this before, that Matthew's audience is Jewish. And so he's going to take great strides to connect this to the Old Testament. And so Jesus' face shone like the sun, just like Moses did. Okay. And Peter addresses Jesus as Lord. Here, the disciples fall on their faces with fear, and Jesus touches them, and there's an explicit connection to John the Baptist as Elijah. Again, why is that important? Because it's a Jewish audience. In Mark's account, he mentions 6 days. But in his, he emphasizes the dazzling whiteness of Jesus' clothes. He notes that there's fear and confusion, and includes the disciples questioning about rising from the dead and their discussion of Elijah's coming. And then Luke, we have 8 days instead of 6. And so what do you think the deal about 8 days versus 6? Did Luke just get the story wrong?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe they slept the other 2 days.
Maybe they slept the other 2 days.
Well, they may have been like in a state of altered consciousness or something.
Typical
Okay.
psychiatrist.
It's longer than a week. So
Yeah.
maybe just indicating that there's like quite a bit of time, and yet they're still talking about Jesus's departure.
Okay.
Do I remember hearing you say at one point recently, the 8 days is a bridge to the creation story?
Well,
Yeah, that's
it's a bridge to sort of, yeah, kind of in the sense that it's the next new beginning.
Yeah,
The next new beginning. So starting something new. And so in some ways, Luke saying about 8 days later, here, hold up, readers, pay attention, because Jesus is starting something new.
You
Okay.
know, it can just be as simple as
He wasn't sure because he
him,
said,
him not being an eyewitness. It's like, well, yeah, it was sometime between 7 and 8 days.
Or he misread the scroll. That was his resource.
Yeah.
Dim
Well-
light,
Seriously.
6, 8,
Or
looks the
even
same.
interviewing the descendants of people that were there.
So,
You know, you might get 4 different stories from 5 different people.
but so thinking about our first session when we were talking about source literature, where do you think Luke would have gotten his account most likely from?
Mark or Q?
Mark.
Probably Mark. Probably Mark. Probably Mark, because all three, as you think about those 3 stories, there was a whole lot of similarities between them. And so most likely, if you're looking at and doing a study in source, this probably is. We know that Mark's account came first, so most likely they probably had gotten the information from Mark's account.
Mark was written to the Jews,
Mark was probably written to a Roman congregation.
a Roman congregation.
Mm-hmm. All right, mentions Jesus was praying when he was transfigured. In this one, as I think it was Debbie had mentioned they were talking about Jesus' departure, and if you actually look at the word departure in Greek, what do you think that word is?
Exodus.
It's Exodus. So his exodus in Jerusalem. All right. It notes that the disciples were heavy with sleep. Mentions the cloud had overshadowed them. And if we think about the idea of hyperlinks, where would our minds go with a cloud that overshadowed them?
Moses.
Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai. And they were told to keep silent afterwards. Okay. And so if we go back and think about each one of the gospels, and you think about, okay, what were they trying to say and to whom were trying to say it? You know, Matthew, we said, is talking to a Jewish audience. So he's very, very interested in the Old Testament, very, very interested in the fulfillment of prophecy. Okay. And so very intentional about connecting it to the Old Testament. Okay. We think about the voice, the voice affirms the authority of Jesus. From the cloud, Jesus is conferred as the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Okay. And it's positioned between his prediction of suffering and a healing miracle. So Matthew highlights that Jesus' glory is inseparable from his suffering and his mission to redeem humanity. All right, if we look at Mark, Mark was more to a Roman audience, okay, and he is probably the source material of this. He emphasizes the mystery of Jesus. He talks about the disciples' confusion, okay, and his instruction to tell no one. We hear that often in Mark's gospel. They'll say, as they're going along, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. When does that change? When does that shift happen in Mark's gospel? We should have remembered that from last year. We were going. Why are you
I can't
snickering
remember
there?
last week.
So last year, as we went through the lectionary, we were actually in the Gospel of Mark. Okay, and we spent towards the end of the year, we're talking about Mark, and as in the last part of the gospel, okay, is his leg that goes from Tyre and Sidon down along through to Jerusalem. And so when he's on that last leg, that journey to Jerusalem, suddenly he doesn't say, don't tell anyone anymore. He becomes very, very forthright, becomes very bold in pronouncing who he is. Okay. But in that first part and first 2/3 of Jesus or Mark's gospel, Jesus is mysterious. Okay. Again, it follows the prediction of his suffering, looking at the link between suffering and glory, and by sandwiching the transfiguration between suffering and the stories of human frailty, Mark emphasizes that tension between Jesus' divine glory and his human mission. And then lastly, but not least, we have Luke. Spend some time always talking about Jesus' prayer life. Uniquely mentions that the transfiguration occurs while praying. I guess it enforces the importance of prayer, but I think more than anything else, what we see in Luke is divine revelation when Jesus is praying about his ministry and who he is. We have the this Exodus theme that happens in Luke, talking about his departure, his exodus, linking the event of his redemption and his death and resurrection, and how that is an exodus. Okay. And then the juxtaposition of the divine glory with human weakness. The disciples' failure and argument reinforces who Jesus is. And so we think about these, each one of the gospels, they're the same. So we have this, basic understanding who Jesus is, but then each one kind of adds a little bit or has their own kind of unique lens of how they're spinning this to talk about who Jesus is. Okay. But, if we think about it at the core, in all of the accounts, the transfiguration and the cross are connected. We have the death and resurrection prediction and the transfiguration are connected. And so we have this idea that, it's only through the cross, only through the resurrection that we're going to see God's glory. So, that's kind of like an overview. Let's talk a little bit together. So as you think about the transfiguration, how does it affirm Jesus' divine identity and mission? How did you see that happen?
Well, he ended up still being there, and the other two disappeared.
Okay, so okay.
It shows that they're not on equal footing, that he's above them.
Okie doke. Yeah, because he got all three there. I mean, if you think about Peter, what did Peter want to do?
Build all three houses.
Housing for them.
Yeah, well, he wanted to build sort of a house, a dwelling place, an altar for all three.
Mm-hmm.
But here Mark says, but Jesus was the only one left. So in some ways, they're not on equal footing.
Right.
I was going to say I won't say that's the opposite, but just the fact that Moses and Elijah are there and that these are human individuals that God has worked through before identifies that, something pretty amazing is about to happen. So.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Well, God did speak in all three accounts and confirm that he was his son, and that's really a stamp of approval.
Mm-hmm.
Could you have the transfiguration without God?
No,
Without God's voice?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay, so they're equally connected. So the change in Jesus as well as the divine voice are all part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts?
Call to listen to him means that we're supposed to do what he says.
Hmm. But
And that
sometimes,
sounds simplistic, but we're supposed to do what he says, which is like everything or most things in the Old Testament, obeying God's laws, maybe not the way the Jews have to, but we have to follow what he tells us on a day-to-day basis sometimes what we need to do.
Mhm.
And it's tough.
Mm.
It can be tough.
So I agree 100% with what you said, but as you think about the command to listen to him here in this particular story, and this story being connected to what comes before it, is there anything in particular other than, hey, this is Jesus, listen to what he has to say? That's everything has to say, which
no.
I agree with. Is there something in particular that we're supposed to listen to him about?
Well, the fact that he is who he says he is,
Hmm.
and that is what has just come, and the fact that he's talking about what has to happen next.
Hmm. Yeah, because what happens, when you know, they're there and Jesus says, "Well, who do they say that I am?" And they
Some
say,
say Moses, some say Elijah,
hmm. And some
some
say
say a prophet.
a great teacher, whatever. And then he comes and says, "Well, yeah, that's all nice. That's good. But I've hung out with you guys for a very long time, and we're close. Who do you say that I am?"
Yeah.
And he says, "You're the Messiah."
Mhm.
And that we know from the story that, Peter had a little trouble with this, didn't he?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't Jesus say, "Hey, get behind me, Satan."
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so as we're thinking about this, you know, um, the disciples had a little bit of trouble understanding Jesus, didn't they?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and
And
accepting, understanding and accepting and like really, really absorbing what he was saying about the need to suffer. It's
mhm,
like, how many times is Jesus saying, you guys just don't get this? Like, how many times do I have to tell you this is not going to be, butterflies and roses. This
mhm.
is ugly.
and
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 it's
so-
amazing though. They had such a hard time accepting it, and they were there. They were living it. They were in the moment. And here
Mhm.
we are, 2,000 years later, and you know, we accept it a little bit better than what some of them did. It sounds like.
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know that we accept it that much better because actually being a Christian and standing up for what you say you'll stand up for is kind of hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think in a lot of times it always has been.
Hmm.
Think of what happened after the crucifixion and how people were persecuted.
Hmm.
We're just canceled,
Yeah,
at least in this country.
canceled is a good word for it.
And in other countries, we're still tortured and executed. I mean, not that many, but in that time, you were fed to the lions.
Mm.
Ouch. Sorry, cat
Yeah.
just bit me.
Oh,
Yeah,
I thought
the
that was
lion, the
comment
little
on
lion just bit
the
me.
lions.
Luna.
Yeah, there's not in this country anyway, there's not that much. I mean, yeah, there's, like you said, we're canceled.
And
We don't really have to pay that high of a cost.
Oh, yeah, right.
I mean, yeah, maybe, if I say something to somebody, oh, yeah, she's just a kook, but that's, I can continue living and being a kook. That's fine.
Yeah, it is interesting because I teach at two different schools, and one of them is, by name Quaker, but it really is either people there are atheist or they're Jewish. Um, not there are like 18 students who are Christian, and I only know this because we're doing these affinity group things, and there's 18 out of 400 kids in it.
Oh my,
Yeah, in the Christian group. But teaching at St. Joe's, I don't feel like there are crucifixes in every classroom, and it's very, very like a different vibe. So I feel I can let my hair down there a little more,
But they are Jesuits.
yeah. But I mean, I
That,
feel like I can say Happy Easter and
well,
nobody's
yeah.
gonna throw something at me.
Or Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christmas party instead of a holiday party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So, what does the presence of Moses and Elijah teach us about the continuity between the Old and the New Testaments?
Well, just a little bit I hear about the Jewish religion. They seem to dwell a lot on Elijah more so than Jesus. I mean, I heard even some feel that Jesus wasn't even, it was a false prophet. He wasn't even a prophet. He was a false prophet. They seem to have a lot about Elijah. And that's, I still can't grasp the concept of how they miss Jesus. I really don't, but I wasn't there.
Well, I'm more asking from a standpoint of, Christian folks. As Christian folks, where do we tend to put most of our time and energy? Unless of
Moses and
of
Elijah
course,
keep showing up.
what's that?
Moses and Elijah keep showing up all through the New Testament. I mean,
Okay.
John the Baptist, people thought he was Elijah. Jesus, people thought he was Elijah. Moses and Elijah are the Transfiguration. Moses and Elijah are in Revelation when Jesus comes back. They're just there.
I think that a lot of the things that we see in what Jesus is doing reflect back to the things that Moses and Elijah did do or were known for. I mean, the separation of themselves for 40 days before they did anything important, or going up mountaintops, and, just those sorts of things showing up connect them. So if we look to try to find those connections, either what, Jesus doing them deliberately to kind of make connections to, especially in Matthew, writing to Jewish people to just say, like, this is an important person that should be recognized. But that you can't really read the New Testament and really see the importance of it without the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was Jewish, so they were they were important to him. Their stories were important to him. Their prophecies, Elijah's prophecies, were important to him. He was the fulfillment of those prophecies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In that he was the fulfillment of prophecy. I don't understand why they don't the New Testament doesn't pull Isaiah anymore.
They don't. They
Or at
don't.
least the books that we have.
Yeah. So in the New Testament, um, they call on, or we see the names of Moses, we see the names of Elijah, but all throughout the Gospels, Jesus, even in Paul, um, there's a lot of hyperlinks back to the Psalms and
Mhm.
back to Isaiah. It's just not that they just don't footnote it and say, this is from the Psalms or this is from Isaiah. So there's a lot of stuff that we read that you know is stuff that comes right from those particular places. We just don't see it, it's not just as glaring as we see it, okay, because we see the name Moses show up, the name Elijah show up. But if you look at it, it's not just the presence of Moses or Elijah, it's the presence of Isaiah's teaching. It's the stuff of the Psalms that we think about the Bible as both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. But for Jesus, what did he have? He had the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. So he had the Hebrew Bible that was his, and that's what he used. That's what he taught from.
Mhm.
And so it becomes pretty important that if you really want to know and understand Jesus, you really need to know and understand not only the New Testament but the Old Testament as well. We kind of answered the question of listen to him. What about how does seeing Jesus' glory strengthen our faith?
Sometimes it is tempting to think about
What? Hold on.
reading parables and like, oh, these are nice lessons and, be nice to your neighbor. And it's easy to put kind of like Jesus in the friend zone,
Mhm.
rather than the God zone.
Mhm.
But this reminds us that he is God.
Okay.
Yeah, and what he gave up to come as a person to earth, like, because he is God.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts? Okay. So,
It doesn't strengthen my faith because I've always known that that's what he's like.
mm,
I was always there.
okay.
I've had some lapses of faith, as have we all, I think. But I've always known that he was there in the end.
Mm,
He's not any different. Him being glorified, he's always been glorified.
okay. So we think about this particular section, a couple other things that are kind of connected to it as well. So on your own, if you have the time and feel the the curiosity to do it, you can look at 2 Peter 1:16-18. Um, it's Peter's later reflection on witnessing the transfiguration as he had time to
Go back
process.
look him up later.
We
The camera.
the transfiguration pulls heavily from the story of Moses on Mount Sinai. So we can look at Exodus 24:15 to 18. And then
Hang on, we're just like,
What happened?
okay, I'm
Look
not
at the
gonna,
picture.
I'm not gonna
Oh,
change it. That's fine.
yeah, leave it there for a bit.
And
Sorry.
then that's okay. And then we have 2 Kings 2:3 to 12, talking about Elijah's departure and its connection to Exodus in Luke's account. So, that kind of brings us full circle here as far as the transfiguration goes, as we kind of get ready to part ways, because it's 13 after. Any aha moments that you had here as we were talking? Any new revelation? Any anything
I
anybody
never,
would share?
I may have known it in the back of my mind, but I never consciously thought about it. Elijah being John the Baptist.
Okay.
Mm.
All right. I don't understand where they get that correlation.
So
Yeah, I don't think we're supposed to believe in reincarnation, but I mean, maybe it's true.
I don't know
I don't
that they're necessarily saying that Elijah was reincarnated in John. I think what they're saying is that there was a tradition that they thought that Elijah was going to return, and when he returns, that he was going to usher in or pave the way for the Messiah. And that what we had was, the rise of Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, who fulfilled a role and began to pave the way for Jesus as the Messiah. So he becomes, if you will, the new Elijah.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Because
But
that's
Elijah bodily or whatever shows up in Revelation with Jesus and Moses.
right. But I don't think that I believe that John the Baptist was a real person, and that he was not Elijah.
Yeah,
But
it's a concept.
But he fulfilled a role that Elijah would have fulfilled in preparing the way for the Messiah. Any other revelations that people had?
it was nice to kind of think about all three of these in context,
Mhm.
and where they followed, and what they preceded, just because I guess I always found, when we talk about Transfiguration Sunday, but it just kind of pops out of the blue, and I don't think it's in order in the lectionary when we talk about it, and it always feels like strange to me.
Yeah.
I always thought that Transfiguration was when Jesus was taken up to heaven.
That's the ascension.
Well, sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. Yeah, that's the ascension, not transfiguration. All right. So next week, I know you guys always like to know what's coming next. So next week is the miracles in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So we're going to look at miracles. Obviously, we can't look at all the miracles. We're going to look at some of the miracles in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then after that, we'll look at miracles in John's gospel, because they are a little bit different. We call them miracles, and in John's gospel, they call them more of signs. Okay, so next week, miracles in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
So you don't have the specific miracles you're going to talk about?
I'll tell you what. I have it. I don't have it right at the ready. So
Okay.
how about if I do this? I'll look and I'll send it to you.
All right.
She
sounds like-
she wants a teaser trail.
A teaser trail. I'm not great at teaser trails, but yeah, I can give you the ones we're going to look at. Because we certainly can't look at all of them.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So which ones?
Okay. Yeah. There's just so many.
Turn water into wine.
Oh, that's I can tell you that's not next week because that's a sign and that comes in John. So next week we're just doing the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think
Debbie, I'm
that
glad you came and joined us. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Will we see you next week?
You're muted.
You're muted.
I was coughing, that's why. I plan on it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Great.
Please come back. We're having a dinner on Saturday. Come on and hang out
Yeah.
with us.
The
We're
ham
actually
di-
allowed
ham
to-
dinner.
My family is doing something for me. I don't know what it is. It's my birthday this week.